time for you to get access to this is by listening closely. We should not make it obvious that we're recording Kermit. Anyways, what today's presentation was supposed to be is the title was supposed to be the Infinite Content Framework. And that is a framework that I used to use, which is how do you take one headline and turn that into 25 different subjects by turning, like, here's how I did X amount in Y using Z. And I used to use this back in the days when my Twitter account had 300 followers. And preparing for this presentation, I realized that was why my Twitter account had 300 followers. It's just not the right content method. So instead, I decided to use a different content method, which is the actual OG infinite content method that we will never run out of, which is the art of storytelling. And before we get into the core about storytelling, how can you use it? What is the formula of a good storytelling? Because as you're going to notice, every single movie out there, every single story, every single high-performing post out there follows the exact same framework. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my first experience with storytelling. And that was in 2016. During my first year of university. So as you guys know, in university, there are all these university associations that are tailored to different types of interests that students have. And the one I was part of was called Engineers Without Borders. Engineers Without Borders, you want to think of it as an NGO. They design and build wells for Africa. And every year they select a couple students to go out to Africa to actually build these projects. So it's one of those NGOs, student-led NGOs. And although I never ended up going to Africa, I did end up giving away free pastries to people that would be willing to come and have conversation with us. And the goal behind this setup that we had right here with the free pastries is to get into conversations with people in the hope of having those people signing up with Engineers Without Borders. It's a free club, student-led, university-funded. And the way we were to increase our impact, to have more ideas, more people being part of the club, was by onboarding and bringing in people that would like the experience and that would like to put that on their CV a lot of times. So at first, what we started off with was a stand like this one with pastries, and the sign said free pastries. And although we magically happened to be able to give out all the free pastries, we were never really able to onboard anyone into the association. We were never really able to get these conversations going. We were never really able to get the impact that we wanted. We were just giving free pastries, which were costing us. So one day, my colleague here had the idea, what if we throw in a giant sign? This sign right here that asks people, how can you create change? And I want to put the emphasis on the you. So what ended up happening, people started to come up to the booth, started to come up to us. And instead of the free treats being the goal behind why people were showing up, all of a sudden, we realized that we were starting to have real conversations with real people. We would have people come up to us and start sharing their goal, their purpose. I joined engineering because I've always wanted to. I'm a big believer that climate change is about to disrupt, is going to create a bad future for our kids. So that's why I got into engineering, and that's why I want to get involved. And it's by asking people the right question that we were able to get the true reason, the true intent out of them. And it's by creating that connection with them that all of a sudden we saw the amounts of signups that we had for the associations skyrocket. It was all by adding this one sign, making the people with who we're talking with the hero of whatever setting they were in. How can you create change here? And this is something that I learned, and this is something that I see very often wherever you go, whether you're on X reading content, whether you're on the internet watching, whether it's this presentation. The shortest distance between two strangers is a story. I could sit here and tell you that I have 1, 2, 3 in my CV, but if I tell you who's Leon, what do I believe in, what is my story, this is how we get the closest to people. And that's why a lot of us here feel very close and very good friends with someone like NFT God, for example, Because he's a very good storyteller. He does a very good job at bringing you into his world, but then making you the hero of the journey. Because at the end of the day, a good story makes you the hero of the journey. So, with that, what we're going to be doing in the next couple of slides is really studying and identifying what is the chemistry of a good story and how can we use it. But before that, so something I did want to bring up. So in preparation for this presentation during the weekend, I went back to my Facebook post from 8 years ago when I was back in university, and I realized that on this one Facebook post that was made, there was one comment on this that I never saw until this weekend. And right here in the comment section was my year one university crush that had commented on this picture asking, "Is this still happening?" And only now did I get the chance to see this. What a tragedy. Why didn't Chimpers happen 8 years ago? Well, I could have seen this.
Man,
It's
it's,
okay,
it's
life
never
is-
too late, man. It's never too late. Reply now.
Well, hey, listen, is this still happening? Who's down to go distribute free pastries? We'll rock, maybe Chimpers, you can subsidize this. We'll rock Chimpers.
I'd say to
apparel.
her, it's not still happening, but is there a chance that me and you can still happen?
Oh, you got that Riz, brother. Beautiful. So who here wants to learn the chemistry of a successful story? Drop some emojis, some thumbs up, some claps, some fire emojis. And how can we move people using the stories? Beautiful. So the best performing stories all have the same elements in place. They all have the same few ingredients that constitute the successful story. And they all have the following. They have a character, someone for whom we can cheer for. They have a setting. There's a place where this story is happening. Then there's a struggle. There's a tension that happens. And this struggle introduces a difficulty that needs to be overcome. Then there's a pursuit. There's a track that the character needs to progress in, that needs to follow to solve the struggle. Then there's a pivot. Every good story has a surprise moment where things take a turn that we were not expecting. And then finally, this is where everyone gets the dopamine hit. There's the payoff. And you want to start thinking, whenever you start thinking about the storytelling archetype, they call the story arc, it all has these 6 ingredients. And if you want to think about that, there's even, by the way, storytelling is a highly studied field. And there's that pyramid called the Freytag pyramid. I swear this is not a pyramid scheme, guys. This is called the Freytag's pyramid. And it starts like that, with the exposition. This is where you introduce the character and the setting. And then you want to think there's a rising action. This is where things build up very quickly. You have the climax, and then you have the falling action. What I want us to notice, which is interesting because I'm about to show you some examples, is the duration at which a story happens. You want to think that the climax typically happens by the very end of the story, and the wrap up is very quick. The big chunk of the big chunk of the story progressing is between the exposition and the rising action. If you notice all your favorite movies, the climax always happens in the last 20 minutes, and then the falling action, the movie's wrapping up, you get the payoff, people leave the movie with a sense of relief, the bad guy ends up being defeated, our hero ends up winning, and we all leave with that sense of resolution, that sense of payoff. And for us to understand an example, I'd like to share with you the story that reshaped an entire industry. And some of you here may know that story, some not, but if you haven't, you're going to love this. So I'd like to take us back to 1928 during a cold winter day in New York City. At a rail station, you want to think back then, the train stations were still running on coal. The scent, the heavy, thick scent of coal in the air. On that railroad station, catching one of the last trains leaving New York City, about midnight, 1 a.m., not a lot of people on that rail station, was a dark figure. That dark figure was none other than Walt Disney. With Walt Disney was standing there his wife. And although this was supposed to be a happy trip to New York City, ended up being one filled with somber and sadness. The emotions that Walt Disney and his wife were sharing then were one of distress and sadness. So what happened? And what happened for this to lead to that event? Over the last couple of years, Walt Disney and his studio have been producing shows for this one company under Charles Mitz called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit became an international sensation, actually became the number one grossing cartoon that ever existed. Back then, cartoons were not that. Before that, it was the era of Charlie Chaplin's. So Walt Disney came in and created, was hired by Charles Mitz to create Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And Charles then resold the rights to that cartoon to Universal, which then turned that distributed that into movie theaters and turned that into merchandise. It became an international success. And Walt Disney had a contract of 25 movies with Charles. And around the 23rd movie, with only 3 movies left in the contract, Disney traveled from Los Angeles by train all the way to New York to go and renegotiate to the contract. And after a week of wining and dining, everything was going well, everyone was happy. We had Walt Disney ask Charles for a 10% raise on his contract, considering the success. So the original cost per show, per movie that Walt Disney was being paid was 2.2K, 2,200. What Walt Disney wanted to do was hire new people, scale the production, improve the production. So he asked to be the new renegotiated contract to be 2,500. And the moment Walt Disney did this, Charles Mitz dropped a bomb on him. And instead of accepting his offer of 2,500, he undercut him to only $1,800 per new movie produced. And on top of that, Charles Mitz had told Disney that he had already negotiated with all the animators of Walt Disney that if he was not to take the contract of that he's being offered, he had already signed all the animators that they were going to move production in-house with Charles Mitz. So with that 1,800, Disney was already paying salary. He was already paying staff. So he would pretty much be operating at a loss for every movie, effectively bankrupting his company. So he had one option here. He would either lose his biggest contract or he would lose all his staff. And this is where I want to ask you guys, like, what would you do if you were in that situation? If you were in the shoes of Walt Disney, what would you do? What would anyone do in that situation?
I'd lose the contract.
And that's exactly what Walt Disney ended up doing. He lost the contract, left immediately with his wife back to the rail station, taking the first train from New York, with the goals of taking the first train from New York back to LA. And at the train station, right before embarking on his train, Walt Disney sent a message, a telegram to his brother and business partner, Roy. And the telegram said, "Everything is all right. We'll be arriving in New York we'll be arriving in Hollywood in 5 days on Sunday, 7:30 a.m. We'll explain everything when I get there." And for someone who's about to lose all his staff and all his contracts, that definitely sounded like something too optimistic. But one thing Walt Disney knew is that Mitz could take away his finances, he could take away his staffs. But one thing he could never take away from him was his biggest asset, which is his imagination. So as the story goes, Walt Disney embarks on that train. And during that 3 to 5 day journey, he spent his entire time sketching, drafting. And by the time he had arrived to LA, he had finished an entirely new concept, an entirely new cartoon. And this cartoon was not a rabbit. It was a mouse. Sorry. It was a mouse. And this is how the story of Mickey Mouse started. It all happened during that trip, during that travel from New York to LA. And only 6 months after the idea was created, Mickey Mouse became the number one grossing cartoon in the world. It became the number one most successful cartoon in the world. And you know the even better story. And you know the even better story. Around that time, MITS actually lost the contract to Universal Studio, who decided to take all their work in-house. So what I want us to take from this story right here is the following. You know, all of us here are trying to build brands. We're all trying to build our presence on social media. Some of us are project founders, some of us are content creators. Our platform could disappear tomorrow. Twitter could ban us. We could lose our money through a drain, through a hack. The US dollar could lose its value. But one thing that no one will ever be able to strip from you is the knowledge that you have. It's the assets that will allow you to restart from zero. And this is something my dad always used to tell me during the times where I actually wanted to drop out of university. He was like, please keep going, because the only thing that they will never be able to strip from you, or that you can never lose, is your education, is your diploma. You could lose your money tomorrow, but you'll never be able to lose your education. So with that story, what does that look like when we are to look at it through the lens of the Freeman's pyramid? At the beginning, the exposition, this is where I introduce to you the character and the setting. Walt Disney at a train station, the train station, dark, New York City, cold, winter. And then the rising action begins the moment I tell you that there was something sad, there was something different about Walt Disney. So the rising action happened all the way from the sad element, the contract, the renegotiation, and the climax being the bomb that MITS dropped on Walt Disney about the contract, the 1800 contract. And this is the climax. This is where you were like, what the hell is Disney going to do? What would I do in this situation? This is the end. And then the falling action, this is where we go into the denouement. This is where the happy ending, the train, the telegram. So right here you can see the telegram that he sends to his brother, and then Mickey Mouse. So here the final ending is where the hero comes out as the winner. And one thing, ladies and gentlemen, that's very interesting is every Hollywood movie that is out there needs to follow this hero journey. The hero journey is something that has been studied again and again and again, and it is the format and the framework that we've been using for ages. And it is the one that does the best at catching people's attention and at bringing them closer to you and to your story. And here's where I want to introduce you to the differences between short form, long form, and ultra long form content. You know, a lot of you here, a question we often get asked is, when should I do a long form tweet and when should I do a long form thread? For example, a tweet, I would always recommend when you have one story that you are expanding on, you should, if it's one story, it should be a long form tweet. A thread is great when you have a series of stories that you want to attach to one another. That is the difference, for example, when you have short form and long form. Now, here's where things get interesting. When you have movies like Lord of the Rings, who's a big Lord of the Rings fan here? Oh, a big geek. Reveal yourself so we can be best friends forever. For example, something like, I can see a couple hands up. A movie or a show like Lord of the Rings, you have the main story arc that is developing, and then within that story arc, you have extra stories that are opening and closing. You have side quests. So everything you do, there's always those stories that are opening and closing. And a good movie is one that does a beautiful job at connecting the dots and at making it smooth. For example, in my YouTube videos, I always try to have two main stories within the video, and I actually plan it that way. I don't know who here has watched, for example, my recent video. I talk about Alex Hormozy, about something that happened. And I attach that story within the bigger story arc, which is how do you do 1, 2, 3, depending on the subject of the video. So that's how I want you to start thinking about it. And all of us here, ladies and gentlemen, have an infinite repertoire of stories that we can use within our content, that we can use within the tweets, within the content that we are writing to bring people in, but also grow our audience. Just yesterday, I made a tweet that is, I actually posted that when I was in the Uber coming back home. And it was like, it was a story of something that I had experienced today. And this is by far my best performing post that I ever made. So 50,000 impressions as we speak. I was not expecting that. But what performs today is no longer like, here's what McDonald's is doing, or here's what 123, or here's how you can become a better, more mindful, or a better content writer. No, no one cares. People want your story. People want to hear your version of something. So there's many ways to refresh our story bank. But the one I found to be most successful, because I've done this exercise and I've gone through the courses, is typically, as humans, it is the points, it is the pieces it is the moments of time of high transition that we have the best stories. It is the times where we went through a transitionary period in our life where we have the best stories. For example, the story about the free pastries that happened when I moved from Lebanon to Canada to start university. It was in the first year. There was a lot happening in my life, and there was something worthy there that I thought was of value for you guys. So what I would like us to do, and I'm going to open this, and I'm going to make this public for everyone because I do want this to be a team exercise. I'm going to share a document. So right here, open for everyone. And I'd like you guys to hop on here, write your names, and then identify 3 to 5 periods of your life that were transitionary. For example,
We
for me,
we need access to edit.
oh, thank you, bro. I'll fix that for everyone. So with the link can edit. There we go. If you refresh the page. You want to write your name on top. And what are the periods of your life where there was a sudden change? For example, it could be where you lost someone, you lost your parent, were broken up with, you moved cities, graduated from university, high school, graduation. What are 3 to 5 for you guys?
So just to be clear, can you give the instruction again?
Yeah, so identify 3 periods of your life where there was a big change that happened. And you know what's beautiful? Just reading, some of the things that are here, and I really do appreciate everyone. Some of them are very, vulnerable things that you're sharing with us at a public age. Sorry, I was reading. My friend just sharing with us your experiences. Just all of a sudden, right now, I feel like I know some of you a lot better because I know your story. I know the hardships some of you may have gone through, and I know that there's all of us here have a bank of depth beyond us just being, the chimpers. And you want to think that each one of those experiences you have right here, when you tie back into the very first lesson we had with Kermit, which is what are your shortcomings? What are your insecurities? What are your skills? What are your views and beliefs about the world? When you tie those two together into those transition periods of your life, this is where you can start deriving stories of value, things that people will learn. For example, what is an example? Something I said that in my persona builder, whenever we were writing what are our shortcomings, one thing I was at a very young age was introverted. I was always introverted, more reserved, never liked partying. Kermit and I actually used to know each other from high school. And I know Kermit was as introverted as I am, if not more. Sorry, Kermit. But we used to be the two nerds in the back of the class, just like talking about gaming because we rather do that than talk to other people. And that's how Kermit and I know each other, actually. So one way to tie that characteristic, physical trait that I have to one of the stories was when I left Lebanon to go to Canada. All of a sudden, I was in a universe that I knew no one. I didn't even speak English. English was always my third language. The obstacles and challenges that I had to go through to become the man I am today, the different steps that came, the journey, and what was the climax. So you can derive many stories there. And one thing that I do want to add right here in the presentation before we wrap up is it's common mistakes that I see a lot of people. I wouldn't say a lot of people, but that I've learned a lot of people do from a book I read about storytelling, which are common mistakes. One of the common mistakes some people do in storytelling, there's two common ones. The first one is making yourself the hero of your journey. You never want to be the hero of the journey of your story. You want to be the mistake maker. So, for example, a bad story would be one where you went through you kept going at it until it finally worked. Where was the mistake? Where did you fuck up? Where was there something that you were inadequate at something, and then you had an external force come to you and create a revelation? You never want to be the hero of your own story. No one wants that. You want to be the mistake maker, and you want people to reflect and see themselves in your mistakes and how you overcame them. The second common mistake is sometimes overdoing the hardships and becoming the victim. No one wants to read or become part of a journey of a victim. So a lot of times what works is making the mistake seem as if it was accidental. You, because of a lack of knowledge, because of a lack of something, you made a mistake, you fucked up, and then you were able to overcome that using 1, 2, or 3. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the storytelling framework. If there's one that will help you really set yourself apart, become more human, and increase how many people, at the end of the day, we're all here to build our brands, we're all here to build our businesses. One thing that I did realize on a logical side is the more stories you share about yourself, the more loyal followers you're going to start having, and the more engagement, the more people are going to start engaging with your posts because they feel like they know you all of a sudden. So become the storyteller, become the storyteller. We all have a bank of stories that we can share, and always follow the Freytag's pyramid.